Thank you, Chief. I'd like to also recognize our sheriff, Jim Frederick from Anne Arundel County, as well as Sheriff Robertson from Allegheny County and Sheriff Chuck Turnant from Cumberland City. And now I'd like to introduce my good friend, colleague from St. Mary's County, Matt Morgan.
Hello all. I want to thank the organizers for this event, calling out Delegate Saab and Delegate Shoemaker over here for organizing it. I want to thank all the law enforcement guys that came as well. Give them a round of applause. And really, I want to thank all the people for showing up today. It's really hot out here. The last time I was in Annapolis, it wasn't so hot. It was a lot cooler then. I was here for the legislative session. And it was cut short because of COVID. And I remember being on the House floor in the State House there and thanking first responders and thanking police officers for the job they were doing at the start of the pandemic. Now, I think it's an absolute shame that only a few months later, we're having a rally defending it. Look, the events that occurred out there in Minnesota with George Floyd, tragic, indefensible, but it should have been a unifying tragedy. Because I haven't met anyone in the public that's trying to defend it or justify it, especially police officers. Should have been a unifying event. And unfortunately, people are using it as an excuse to drive a political narrative and trying to undermine and dismantle the police departments, try to defund them. Look, when you're a Maryland delegate, Baltimore City, I tell you what, 185 murders. The last thing you need to be doing is defunding the police, but yet we have. Last thing, we have people that are, politicians, activists, and even some of you guys out in the media are trying to drive this narrative that police are out there systematically hunting people down. And that is just not true. It's just not true. And we can go over national statistics, FBI statistics, but really what struck it home for me was about 3 weeks ago. I ended up meeting with my local chapter, the NAACP, and my local sheriff. And what really cleared up a lot of things for me was when my sheriff started going over numbers for St. Mary's County. We had over 143 officers had 75,000 calls. So the next question is, well, how many complaints did we have? 44. And 44 complaints. But wait, 29 of those 44 complaints were officers filing complaints on other officers. They were policing themselves. Out of 75,000 calls ran in my county. There was 15 complaints by the general public, and every one of those complaints were investigated and brought to a conclusion. And I'm sitting in the meeting, I'm like, these are unbelievable statistics. I mean, it's no doubt any reasonable person would say they're doing an excellent job. And Delegate Democrat from the south part of the county says, well, it only takes one incident. And right there, that's the political divide. Right there. See, my standard for the police is they protect the public. They do a good job for our citizens and good services for our citizens and protect the public. And if an officer does something wrong, breaks the law, they're held accountable. That's the standard. The new standard for the left is they have to be perfect. And that's almost impossible considering they're running the areas that are having these issues. We don't have these problems in the rural areas of Maryland or in the rural areas of the country. It's predominantly happening in democratic areas. And when they're not perfect, the left uses this as a calling card and an indictment onto the rest of the country, onto our history, onto society. They used it to demonize all police officers. And it's wrong, and it needs to start being called out for what it is. It's political pandering, and there's just no place for it. It's time. You look around, it's time for elected officials to start stepping up. We don't need to always hear you at election time. We don't need you to hear you when it's fundraising time. We need you to show some leadership right now. And what I'm saying, they're pushing their political narrative. Well, their activists are requiring that. That's where they're all at. And right now you have politicians from the East Coast to the West Coast, and both parties that are just petrified of the mob. And they won't stand up to say anything, because if they stand up and speak up, they think they end up like the mayor out there in Minnesota, like the mayor last night in Portland. So they're being shamed into silence. And I'll tell you one thing I've learned in politics is cowardice is contagious. But thank God, so is courage. And if you're willing to stand up and put your neck out, stand up and speak up for what is right, you'd be shocked about the amount of people willing to climb that hill with you. So that's what we're asking for you today, to come climb that hill with us, stand with our law enforcement, because we know they do a great job, defend our country, stand up to the mob, and together we can consider, we'll be the solution for the American promise. Thank you. With that, go to side.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Now I'd like to